The champagne glasses still held their bubbles when Jessica Martinez found herself alone in the honeymoon suite. Her white dress, worth $3,000, hung pristine on the bathroom door. The bed remained untouched. Her new husband, Daniel Thompson, had vanished into the Chicago night, leaving behind only his wedding ring on the nightstand and a cryptic note, "I know who you really are." 24 hours earlier, 200 guests had witnessed what appeared to be the perfect wedding. The bride, radiant in a designer gown, had exchanged vows with a successful architect who seemed to worship the ground she walked upon. The ceremony at the Palmer House Hotel had cost $4,000 to $7,000. The reception featured a live band, premium liquor, and a 5-tier cake that took 3 bakers 2 days to complete. But as midnight approached on what should have been the happiest night of Jessica's life, she found herself facing a terrifying reality. Her husband of 8 hours had disappeared, and the reason would expose a web of deception that stretched back 15 years. This wasn't just a case of cold feet or wedding day nerves. This was something far more complex, involving stolen identities, buried secrets, and a crime that had remained unsolved for over a decade. The Chicago Police Department would later classify this as one of the most unusual missing person cases in their files. What started as a simple report of a missing groom would evolve into an investigation that would shake 2 families to their core and reveal that sometimes the person you marry might not be the person you think they are. Detective Maria Santos, a 15-year veteran of the Chicago PD, had seen her share of wedding day disasters. Runaway brides, cheating spouses, family feuds that erupted during receptions. But when she received the call about Daniel Thompson's disappearance, she had no idea she was about to enter a case that would challenge everything she thought she knew about love, trust, and identity. What do you think happened to Daniel? Was this a case of a groom getting cold feet, or did he stumble upon something about his bride that made him flee into the night? The truth, as we'll discover, is far more shocking than anyone could have imagined. Stay with me as we explore this incredible true crime story that began with wedding bells and ended with police sirens. This case will take us through the darkest corners of human deception and show us just how far people will go to escape their past. But first, let me ask you this. How well do you really know the person you're closest to? 6 months before that fateful wedding night, Daniel Thompson was a man who had everything figured out. At 32, he owned a successful architectural firm in downtown Chicago, drove a BMW, and lived in a converted loft that he designed himself. His life was structured, predictable, and exactly how he wanted it. Then Jessica Martinez walked into his favorite coffee shop on a rainy Tuesday morning. She was 28, with dark hair that caught the light just right and a smile that made Daniel forget about the building plan spread across his table. Jessica claimed she was new to Chicago, having moved from Phoenix for a marketing job at a tech startup. She seemed perfect, intelligent, funny, and genuinely interested in his work. When she accidentally spilled her latte on his blueprints, Daniel found himself asking her to dinner instead of being annoyed. Their relationship moved fast. Too fast, Daniel's best friend Marcus would later tell police. Within 2 weeks, Jessica had practically moved into Daniel's loft. She cooked elaborate dinners, helped him organize his chaotic home office, and listened with genuine fascination as he explained the intricacies of sustainable architecture. She seemed to understand him in ways that his previous girlfriends never had. But there were small things that didn't quite add up. Jessica claimed to be from Phoenix, yet she didn't know basic landmarks when Daniel mentioned visiting Arizona for a conference. She said she worked in marketing, but when Daniel surprised her at her office building one afternoon, the security guard claimed no one by that name worked there. When Daniel asked about it, Jessica laughed it off, saying she was freelancing and used different office spaces. Her past remained frustratingly vague. She claimed her parents had died in a car accident when she was 21, leaving her with no close family. She had few photos from her childhood, explaining that most had been destroyed in a house fire. When Daniel suggested they visit Phoenix so he could see where she grew up, Jessica would change the subject or create elaborate excuses about why the timing wasn't right. Marcus Rodriguez, Daniel's college roommate and business partner, found Jessica charming but unsettling. She was almost too good to be true, he would later tell Detective Santos. She knew exactly what to say, exactly how to make Daniel feel special. It was like she had studied him and crafted the perfect personality to match his needs. Despite Marcus's concerns, Daniel was completely smitten. Jessica had a way of making him feel like the most important person in the world. She would leave little notes in his briefcase, surprise him with tickets to architectural exhibitions, and listen for hours as he described his dream of designing affordable housing for low-income families. She seemed to share his values, his interests, even his quirks. 4 months into their relationship, Daniel proposed. He had planned an elaborate surprise at the top of the Willis Tower, where he had designed a small installation piece years earlier. Jessica said yes immediately, tears streaming down her face. She seemed genuinely overwhelmed with joy, but Marcus noticed something else in her expression, relief, as if she had been holding her breath for months. The wedding planning began immediately. Jessica insisted on handling most of the arrangements, claiming she wanted to surprise Daniel with her attention to detail. She chose the Palmer House Hotel, selected a caterer who specialized in authentic Italian cuisine, and even found a photographer who had shot weddings for several Chicago celebrities. Every choice was perfect, every detail carefully considered. But as the wedding approached, Daniel began to notice more inconsistencies. Jessica's friend from Phoenix, who was supposed to be her maid of honor, suddenly couldn't make it due to a family emergency. Her former colleagues who were invited to the wedding all seemed to have last-minute conflicts. When Daniel asked about her wedding dress shopping, Jessica claimed she had found the perfect dress at a boutique in New York, but when he offered to come with her for the final fitting, she insisted on going alone. The night before the wedding, Daniel found Jessica going through his laptop while he was in the shower. When he asked what she was doing, she claimed she was looking for photos of them together to create a slideshow for the reception. But Daniel had already given her access to all their photos weeks earlier. Something wasn't right, but he pushed the feeling aside. Tomorrow was their wedding day, and he was determined to focus on their future together. What was Jessica really looking for on that laptop? And why did she seem so nervous about her own wedding? The answers would soon shatter everything Daniel thought he knew about the woman he was about to marry. The morning of October 15th dawned crisp and clear in Chicago. Daniel woke up in his loft alone, following the tradition that the couple shouldn't see each other before the ceremony. He had barely slept, his mind racing with excitement and a nagging anxiety he couldn't shake. At 9 a.m., Marcus arrived with coffee and bagels, ready to fulfill his duties as best man. "You look terrible," Marcus observed, setting down the breakfast. Second thoughts. Daniel shook his head, but his hands trembled slightly as he reached for his coffee. "Just wedding nerves, I guess. It's a big day." Meanwhile, across town at the Palmer House Hotel, Jessica was going through her own morning routine. She had insisted on getting ready alone, claiming she wanted some quiet time before the chaos began. In reality, she was making phone calls to numbers that weren't in her regular contacts list. The conversations were brief, cryptic, and conducted in hushed tones. "Everything's on schedule," she whispered into her phone at 9:30 a.m. "After tonight, it'll all be over." At 11 a.m., the wedding photographer, Sarah Chen, arrived at the hotel to capture the bride's preparation. She found Jessica applying makeup with steady hands, showing no signs of typical bridal nervousness. Sarah had photographed over 300 weddings, and she knew the look of a confident bride. But there was something different about Jessica, a calculated calmness that seemed almost professional. "You're remarkably composed for someone about to walk down the aisle," Sarah commented, adjusting her camera settings. Jessica smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I've been planning this day for a very long time." The ceremony was scheduled for 4 p.m. By 2 p.m., guests were beginning to arrive at the Palmer House. Daniel's family filled the groom's side, his parents, Robert and Linda Thompson, his younger sister Emma, and various aunts, uncles, and cousins. They were a tight-knit group from suburban Milwaukee, excited to welcome Jessica into their family. Jessica's side of the chapel told a different story. Only 12 people sat in the bride section, and Daniel didn't recognize any of them. When he had asked about the small guest list, Jessica explained that she preferred intimate gatherings and that most of her friends lived too far away to attend. Now, Looking at the strangers who were supposedly her closest companions, Daniel felt that familiar knot of unease in his stomach. At 3:30 p.m., Daniel's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Check your email. The truth about your bride is waiting." Daniel's first instinct was to ignore it, probably spam or a cruel prank. But something made him open his laptop in the hotel's business center. The email contained a single attachment, a newspaper clipping from the Phoenix Tribune dated 3 years earlier. The headline read, "Local woman sought in investment fraud case." The accompanying photo showed a woman who looked remarkably like Jessica, but with blonde hair and different clothing. The article detailed how Rachel Catherine Morrison had allegedly stolen $200,000 from elderly clients at a Phoenix financial planning firm before disappearing. The investigation had gone cold after she vanished without a trace. Daniel stared at the screen, his world tilting. The woman in the photo had the same eyes as Jessica, the same smile, even the same small scar on her left eyebrow that Jessica claimed came from a childhood accident. But the article described someone completely different, a woman with no moral compass who had preyed on vulnerable seniors. His phone rang. Marcus's voice was urgent. "Daniel, where are you? The ceremony starts in 20 minutes. I need you to come to the business center. Now." Daniel's voice was barely above a whisper. When Marcus arrived, Daniel showed him the article. Marcus read it twice, his face growing pale. This could be a coincidence. Lots of people look alike. But Daniel was already scrolling through more search results. Rachel Morrison had been born in Denver, not Phoenix. She had worked for 3 different financial firms in 4 years, leaving each under suspicious circumstances. Most disturbing of all, she had a history of targeting successful men in their 30s, men who matched Daniel's exact profile. "She's been planning this," Daniel whispered. "The whole relationship, the wedding, everything. She's been studying me." At 4:15 p.m., guests were growing restless. The ceremony was supposed to have started, but there was no sign of the groom. Jessica stood in the bridal suite, still in her wedding dress, checking her phone repeatedly. Her carefully constructed facade was beginning to crack. Emma Thompson knocked on the door. "Jessica, we can't find Daniel anywhere. His phone is going straight to voicemail." Through the door, Jessica's voice remained steady. "I'm sure he's just running late. Wedding day jitters." But inside the suite, Jessica was frantically packing. She had 3 different forms of identification in her purse, along with a plane ticket to Miami leaving at 11 p.m. This wasn't her first time disappearing, and she had learned to always have an exit strategy. At 4:45 p.m., Daniel was in his rental car, driving away from the Palmer House Hotel. He had left his wedding ring, his phone, and a note for Jessica on the nightstand of their honeymoon suite. The note contained just 4 words that would haunt Jessica for years to come. "I know who you really are." But Daniel had no idea that by exposing Jessica's true identity, he had just made himself a target. Rachel Morrison had spent 3 years building the perfect life as Jessica Martinez, and she wasn't going to let anyone destroy it. Not even the man she had almost married. The question that would drive the investigation for months was this: when someone's entire life is built on deception, how far will they go to protect their lies? Detective Maria Santos received a missing person report at 2:17 a.m. on October 16th. She had been working the night shift for 6 months, dealing primarily with domestic disturbances and bar fights. A missing groom wasn't exactly unprecedented, but something about Jessica Martinez's phone call struck her as unusual. He just vanished. Jessica had told the 911 operator, her voice perfectly calibrated between concern and confusion. "We were supposed to be starting our honeymoon, and it's just gone." Santos arrived at the Palmer House Hotel at 3:45 a.m. The honeymoon suite was immaculate except for the wedding ring and note on the nightstand. Jessica sat on the edge of the bed, still wearing her reception dress, a sleek black number she had changed into after the ceremony was cancelled. Her makeup was flawless, her hair perfectly styled. Santos had seen genuine distress before, and this wasn't it. "Walk me through the last time you saw your husband," Santos said, pulling out her notepad. Jessica's story was rehearsed, almost theatrical. Daniel had seemed nervous during the canceled ceremony, she explained. After the guests left, they had come up to the suite together. He had excused himself to get eyes from the machine down the hall around 11 p.m. When he didn't return after 30 minutes, she went looking for him. His car was gone from the hotel parking garage. Did you two have any arguments recently? Any disagreements about the wedding or your future together? Nothing major, Jessica replied, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue that remained completely dry. Daniel's been under a lot of stress with work. His architecture firm just landed a major contract for a downtown development project. Maybe the pressure got to him. Santos made notes, but her instincts were screaming. The bride's responses were too polished, too convenient. Real people in crisis stumbled over their words, repeated themselves, showed genuine emotion. Jessica Martinez was performing. At 6 a.m., Santos interviewed Marcus Rodriguez at his apartment. Unlike Jessica, Marcus looked genuinely distraught. He had been Daniel's best friend for 15 years, and his concern was palpable. Daniel wouldn't just run away, Marcus insisted, pacing his living room. He's the most responsible person I know. He's never missed a meeting, never been late for anything important. Something's wrong. Marcus revealed details that Jessica had omitted. Daniel had been acting strangely in the weeks before the wedding, questioning things about Jessica's past that didn't add up. He had mentioned finding inconsistencies in her stories, but had dismissed his own concerns as pre-wedding anxiety. The night before the wedding, Daniel called me at 1 a.m., Marcus said. He was paranoid, talking about how Jessica had been going through his personal files. He thought she might be hiding something, but he couldn't figure out what. Santos felt the familiar tingle of a case about to break wide open. Did Daniel ever mention doing any research on Jessica's background? He hired a private investigator about a month ago, Marcus admitted. Some guy named Tony Castellano. Daniel didn't tell me what he found, but he canceled the wedding invitation twice before finally going through with it. By 8 a.m., Santos was sitting across from Tony Castellano in his downtown office. Castellano was a former Chicago PD detective who specialized in background checks and infidelity cases. His findings about Jessica Martinez were disturbing. Your missing groom's bride doesn't exist, Castellano said bluntly, sliding a thick file across his desk. Jessica Martinez is a ghost. No social security number, no employment history, no educational records. The address she gave Daniel for her Phoenix apartment? It's a vacant lot. The file contained Castellano's real discovery. Rachel Catherine Morrison, wanted in connection with multiple fraud cases across 4 states. The progression was methodical and chilling. Rachel would target successful, lonely men, study their habits and preferences, then craft an identity designed to be their perfect match. She's done this at least 3 times that I could document, Castellano continued. Phoenix, Denver, and Seattle. Each time, she disappears with significant financial assets. In Denver, she convinced a software executive to add her to his business accounts. In Seattle, she married a real estate developer and cleaned out his investment portfolio during their honeymoon. Santos studied the photographs in the file. Rachel Morrison was a chameleon, blonde in Denver, brunette in Seattle, redhead in Phoenix. But the bone structure was identical, and those eyes were unmistakable. What happened to the men she targeted? Castellano's expression darkened. The Denver victim, James Patterson, was found dead in his apartment 3 weeks after Rachel disappeared. Official cause of death was suicide, but the circumstances were suspicious. The Seattle victim, Michael Chen, is still alive but financially ruined. He spent 2 years in therapy trying to recover from what she did to him. Santos felt a chill run down her spine. This wasn't just fraud, it was psychological warfare. Rachel Morrison didn't just steal money, she destroyed lives with surgical precision. At 11 a.m., Santos returned to the Palmer house to arrest Jessica Martinez on outstanding warrants. The honeymoon suite was empty. Jessica had checked out at 9:30 a.m., claiming she needed to stay with friends during this difficult time. The hotel staff remembered her being unusually calm for someone whose husband had just vanished. Santos immediately put out a bolo alert for both Jessica Martinez and Rachel Morrison, but she suspected they were already too late. A woman who had successfully disappeared 3 times before wouldn't stick around once she realized her cover was blown. The question that haunted Santos was whether Daniel Thompson had simply run away, or if he had stumbled onto something that made him Rachel Morrison's next victim. The clock was ticking, and somewhere in Chicago, a dangerous woman was planning her next move. But what Santos didn't know was that Daniel Thompson wasn't running from Rachel Morrison. He was hunting her, and his quest for answers would lead him into a world of deception far more complex than anyone had imagined. If you're wondering what drives someone to create such elaborate deceptions, stick around. The psychology behind Rachel Morrison's crimes will shock you, and the truth about what happened to Daniel Thompson is still to come. While Detective Santos was building her case against Rachel Morrison, Daniel Thompson was 300 miles away in Milwaukee, sitting in his childhood bedroom at his parents' house. He had driven straight there after fleeing the Palmer house, needing time to process what he had learned about the woman he had almost married. Robert Thompson found his son staring at a laptop screen at 6 a.m., surrounded by empty coffee cups and printed documents. Daniel looked like he hadn't slept in days, his wedding suit wrinkled and stained with coffee. "Son, you need to call the police," Robert said gently. "People are worried about you." Daniel shook his head. "The police won't understand. They'll treat this like a runaway groom story. They won't see what I see." What Daniel saw was a pattern that went deeper than Tony Castigliano's investigation had revealed. Using his architectural training for systematic analysis, Daniel had spent the night mapping Rachel Morrison's criminal history like a blueprint. He had identified inconsistencies in the official reports, gaps in the timeline that suggested her crimes were far more extensive than anyone realized. The breakthrough came when Daniel cross-referenced property records with Rachel's known aliases. She didn't just target wealthy men for their money. She was systematically acquiring real estate holdings across multiple states. In Denver, James Patterson had signed over his downtown condo to Jessica Walsh, another alias, 2 days before his death. In Seattle, Michael Chen had transferred ownership of a waterfront property to Rachel Stevens just weeks before she disappeared. Daniel's architectural background allowed him to see something the investigators had missed. Rachel was building a real estate empire under various identities. She wasn't just a con artist. She was a criminal mastermind operating a sophisticated long-term scheme. By 10 a.m., Daniel had made a decision that would change everything. Instead of hiding from Rachel Morrison, he was going to find her. He had advantages that law enforcement didn't. He knew her habits, her preferences, her psychological triggers. He had lived with her for 6 months, studying her just as she had studied him. His first stop was Chicago's financial district, where he met with his business banker, Patricia Kim. Daniel had never told Jessica about his trust fund, a substantial inheritance from his grandmother that he kept in a separate account. But during their relationship, he had noticed small changes in his regular banking statements. Nothing major, just minor fees and adjustments that most people wouldn't notice. "Someone's been probing your accounts," Patricia confirmed, pulling up Daniel's financial records on her computer. "We've had several inquiries about your credit history and asset holdings over the past 3 months. All legitimate-looking requests, but they were coming from different financial institutions." Daniel felt a familiar chill. Rachel had been preparing to clean out his accounts, just as she had done to her previous victims. The wedding wasn't the endgame. It was just the beginning of a much larger theft. Meanwhile, Rachel Morrison was far from finished with Daniel Thompson. She had checked into a budget motel on the outskirts of Chicago under the name Lisa Morgan, one of her backup identities. Her Miami flight had been a deco. She had no intention of leaving the city until she had dealt with the problem Daniel represented. Rachel's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "I know you're still in Chicago. We need to talk. D." She stared at the message, her carefully controlled composure cracking for the first time. Daniel wasn't running scared. He was challenging her. In her 15 years of criminal activity, no Mark had ever tried to confront her directly. Most of her victims were too devastated or too ashamed to fight back. Rachel's response was swift and calculating. She began researching Daniel's family, his business associates, his daily routines. If Daniel wanted to play hunter, she would show him what it meant to be prey. At 2 p.m., Daniel's sister Emma received a phone call at her Milwaukee law office. The voice was female, professional, and claimed to be from the Chicago Police Department. Ms. Thompson, we're investigating your brother's disappearance. We need to ask you some questions about his mental state and any history of depression or suicidal ideation. Emma was immediately suspicious. I haven't heard from any Chicago police. Can you provide a badge number and contact information? The line went dead. Emma called Daniel immediately. Someone's impersonating a police officer and asking about you. They wanted to know about your mental health history. Daniel's blood ran cold. Rachel wasn't just trying to disappear. She was laying groundwork for something much worse. By establishing a narrative of mental instability, she could potentially frame his eventual disappearance as suicide, just as she had done with James Patterson in Denver. The realization hit Daniel like a physical blow. Rachel Morrison wasn't just a thief. She was a killer, and she was already planning his murder. That evening, Daniel made a decision that would either save his life or end it. He sent Rachel a text message with a time and location for a meeting. He was done running, done hiding. It was time to face the woman who had nearly destroyed his life. But as Daniel prepared for what he thought would be a confrontation, he had no idea that Rachel Morrison had already set a trap that would test everything he thought he knew about survival. What do you think? Should Daniel have involved the police instead of trying to handle this alone? The answer to that question would determine whether he lived to see another day. The abandoned warehouse in Chicago's industrial district had been Daniel's choice, a location he had scouted for potential architectural project 2 years earlier. He knew every entrance, every hiding spot, every structural weakness. At 9 p.m. on October 17th, he stood in the shadows near the loading dock, waiting for Rachel Morrison to arrive. Detective Santos had spent the day following leads that seemed to evaporate as quickly as they appeared. Rachel's credit cards had been used at various locations across the city, but security footage revealed different women using them, accomplices or stolen identities. Santos couldn't be sure. The investigation was becoming a maze of false leads and dead ends. At 9:15 p.m., Santos received a call that changed everything. Marcus Rodriguez had been going through Daniel's personal files and found a hidden folder on his computer labeled Insurance Policy. Inside were detailed records of Rachel's movements, financial transactions, and a complete profile of her criminal network. Daniel's been conducting his own investigation, Marcus told Santos over the phone. He's got evidence that Rachel Morrison is part of a larger organization. She's not working alone. The folder contained disturbing revelations. Rachel Morrison was connected to at least 12 other women operating similar schemes across the country. They shared information, resources, and sometimes even identities. The wedding fraud was just one branch of a sophisticated criminal enterprise that had been operating for over a decade. Meanwhile, at the warehouse, Rachel arrived precisely at 9:30 p.m. She appeared alone, but Daniel's architectural eye caught subtle signs that she wasn't. Scuff marks near the north entrance, a slightly ajar door that should have been locked, the faint glow of a cigarette in an upper window. "You're smarter than I gave you credit for," Rachel called out as she entered the main warehouse floor. She was no longer Jessica Martinez. Gone was the warm smile and gentle demeanor. This was Rachel Morrison in her true form, calculating, dangerous, and utterly without remorse. "I know what you did to James Patterson," Daniel said, stepping out of the shadows. "The suicide was staged. You killed him." Rachel's laugh echoed through the empty space. James was weak. He couldn't handle the truth about what he had gotten himself into. I simply helped him reach his inevitable conclusion. Daniel had prepared for this moment, but hearing her casual admission of murder still sent ice through his veins. How many others? "You'd be surprised how many men can't cope with having their entire reality shattered," Rachel replied, circling him slowly. "But you're different, Daniel. You're fighting back. I respect that, even if it makes you incredibly dangerous to my operation." What Rachel didn't know was that Daniel had come prepared. Hidden in his jacket was a recording device, and more importantly, he had sent Detective Santos a detailed message explaining his location and intentions. If something happened to him, the evidence would survive. The confrontation escalated when Rachel revealed the true scope of her plan. She hadn't just been targeting Daniel for his money. She had been using him to gain access to his architectural firm's client list, which included several of Chicago's wealthiest real estate developers. The wedding was meant to be her entrance into an entirely new level of criminal activity. "You were never going to be a victim, Daniel," she said, her voice taking on an almost admiring tone. "You were going to be a partner. With your connections and my skills, we could have built something extraordinary." Daniel realized with horror that Rachel had been planning to recruit him into her criminal network. The elaborate romance, the perfect wedding, even the revelation of her true identity, it had all been a test to see if he had the moral flexibility to join her organization. At 10:45 p.m., Detective Santos arrived at the warehouse with backup, following the GPS coordinates Daniel had provided. They found the main floor empty except for signs of a struggle, overturned furniture, Daniel's recording device smashed on the concrete floor, and drops of blood leading toward the loading dock. But Rachel Morrison had made a crucial mistake. In her arrogance, she had underestimated Daniel's preparation and Detective Santos's determination. The recording device was a decoy. Daniel had been wearing a second device connected to his phone, which had been streaming audio directly to Santos's voicemail. The real confrontation had ended differently than Rachel planned. Daniel had managed to escape during the struggle, but not before planting a GPS tracker on Rachel's vehicle, a technique he had learned from watching true crime documentaries during his months of research. The tracking device led police to a safe house in suburban Chicago, where they discovered the true scope of Rachel's operation. The house contained false identities for dozens of women, financial records showing millions in stolen assets, and detailed psychological profiles of potential victims across multiple states. Rachel Morrison was arrested at 2:30 a.m. on October 18th, along with 3 accomplices who had been coordinating similar schemes in other cities. The FBI classified it as one of the largest romance fraud operations in U.S. history. Daniel Thompson survived his encounter with Rachel Morrison, but the psychological scars would take years to heal. He testified at her trial, where she was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison for fraud, conspiracy, and the murder of James Patterson. The case led to enhanced background check requirements for dating apps and new federal legislation targeting organized romance fraud. As for Daniel, he moved his architectural firm to Milwaukee and specialized in designing secure residential buildings. He never married, but he found peace in creating safe spaces for others. The experience had changed him, but it had also revealed a strength he never knew he possessed. Detective Santos was promoted to sergeant and became a specialist in romance fraud cases. She often spoke at conferences about the Rachel Morrison case, emphasizing the importance of trusting your instincts and the danger of relationships that seem too perfect to be true. The case officially closed on March 15, 2024, but its impact continues to resonate. Rachel Morrison's network had victimized over 200 people and stolen an estimated $15 million. The investigation revealed that romance fraud was far more organized and dangerous than anyone had previously understood. So what can we learn from Daniel Thompson's terrifying experience? Trust your instincts, verify information about people you meet, and remember that sometimes the person who seems perfect for you might be too good to be true. Love shouldn't require you to ignore red flags or dismiss your own concerns. The case may be closed, but some questions remain. What do you think happened during those final moments in the warehouse? How did Daniel manage to outsmart a criminal who had successfully deceived so many others? Comment below and let me know your thoughts. If you find this story interesting, please don't forget to subscribe, like and share to enjoy more crime stories.